Aloha. Welcome to the Fast, Healthy, and Ono Cooking Comfort Food series. Tonight, we'll be learning how to make Japanese one-pot dishes. My name is Cindy Ling. Hi. My name is Cindy Ling, and I'm an AARP Hawaii volunteer. I'll be your host tonight on behalf of our sponsors, Kaunoa Senior Services on Maui, U'o'ala Leaf Cafe at Windward Community College, and AARP Hawaii. Welcome. For those of you who are new or may be unfamiliar with AARP Hawaii, we are a membership organization for people 50 and older, but what we do for everyone. We hope that with this series, you can learn some techniques that you can use to build or maintain a healthy lifestyle. Let's do a quick bit of housekeeping. This is a picture of what you should be seeing at the bottom of your Zoom screen on a PC and Mac, and possibly the top of the screen on an iPad. Everybody is currently on mute. If you want to submit a question or comment, please click on the button that says Q&A and type in your question. I will be monitoring the questions and making sure they get asked. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you may type your questions in the comments. We won't be using the raise hand command because questions will be submitted in the Q&A. The chat command also isn't necessarily going to be needed unless you want to communicate a technical issue. Alice Swift, Dave DeWitt, Jackie Bolin are standing by to help, so please make sure you use the Q&A for questions and comments. We recommend that you select speaker side-by-side view rather than gallery view for this presentation. Do this by clicking on the upper right part of your screen where it says View. Once you are in that view, you can change the size of the slides or the speaker simply by clicking and dragging on the middle bar. Finally, we have added closed captioning to this presentation for those who have difficulty hearing. You can turn this off on your end by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button in the lower right side of your screen and clicking on Hide Subtitle. Before I introduce Chef Dan, let's wish him a happy birthday. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Chef Daniel Swift, who will be leading us through this cooking series.
Voila. Thanks, Cindy. Appreciate that. It is my birthday. I hope everyone, the peanut gallery over here. That's my wife. Thank you all, you guys, for joining us again. I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. I'm not sure if anybody had a chance to make the roulade that we did, but we saved the one that we had for the demo for the class, and I used that one when I visited a friend. So we actually used the leftovers for sandwiches, and we just finished it off yesterday. But tonight we're focusing on, sort of like, one pot dishes. I have a Donabe here. We went and picked up in town. I had a smaller one. I think I've done a similar demonstration out of a regular pottery dish that we had that was more of like a cookie jar, halfway between a cookie jar and a Donabe shape. And that worked fine, but last time I used it, I heard a crack. So you have to be careful with the type that you use. But we'll be going through this and a couple other dishes, focusing on techniques as we always do, and then hopefully adding some ideas for what you might do to add that creative element to your own signature dish. But with the three different ones going, I have some sort of started, and we'll get this one going start to finish because there's enough time for that. But before we do any of the cooking, I just wanted to kind of like focus on the cooking methods that we'll be working with tonight. And if you've followed along over the course of the program that we've done now for about 1.5 years, you see the same cooking methods come up again and again and again. There's a few we don't really use, like microwaving and barbecuing or live fire cooking, just because we're in a cafeteria and we don't have the hood system for it. But the great thing about cooking and the great thing about techniques is the methods, there's so few of them, about 15 methods, and they apply around the world. It's just how you utilize those cooking methods with the ingredients that you have and the flavor profiles that you're looking for. So tonight we're going to work with steaming, simmering, and roasting, all of which we've done before, but not necessarily in the same method that we're doing tonight. And then we talked about the Japanese traditional flavor profile for the one that we're doing in the Donabe, but you can change that up as you wish. The steaming has some fresh herbs, and the primary flavors are coming from the vegetables themselves. And I always try to classify flavor profiles in two broad categories. One is earthy, which is what we'll get when we're working with herbs like rosemary or potatoes or mushrooms and items that might have a high level of umami, and gives us that sort of like terroir or earthy, musty sort of taste. And then there's the other category, which is really more crisp or fresh. And I tried to look up words that were like the opposite of earthy, but there weren't really any that applied towards food. So crisp and fresh is what I tend to think of in those terms. So we've talked about that before with herbs, where you've got earthy herbs like thyme, rosemary, sage, and then you've got the crisp or the fresh herbs on the other side, which is more your parsleys, basil, cilantro, those light kind of salad-like almost herbs. So we'll use a little bit of both tonight and actually cross over a couple of those. So for the recipe for the first one, like I said, we picked this up in town. We just went to Don Quixote. It was actually surprisingly expensive. It was like $36, but it's a large size one. But if you have a high fire clay pot at home, anything that's been fired at cone probably 9 or more for those that are potters out there, it should work fine. The real challenge that you face when you're dealing with ceramic or glass even is the rapid temperature change. So you don't want something really hot and then throw ice into it, or you don't want something, a vessel that's cold that you then put boiling items into. So if you get that rapid change in temperature in a thin vessel, it can crack, and we want to avoid that. So the ingredients that we have for this, very simple: vegetable stock. We've got some mirin, some sake, some low sodium soy sauce. If you don't have that and you just stock regular soy sauce, what I do is water it down. We've done that before in the past, but if you cut it 50-50 with water, you're creating low sodium. And a lot of times these are really, they're almost sometimes too powerful or overpowering. Teriyaki marinades and things like that, we tend to add a little bit of either sake, mirin, or water to dilute it a little bit. And then I've got fresh ginger, garlic, and a little bit of sugar. That's optional. You don't have to use that. And then in this recipe, you could, of course, add anything else. This is similar to like sukiyaki. You could buy probably a pre-made sauce as well and use it for cooking vegetables. But it's super simple to add these items together and bring it up to a boil, which is what we're going to do now. I'll turn it on. And I noticed I didn't turn on the burner until I got the liquid inside the pot. And let's hope that this holds up. I thought about grabbing a metal pot in case it cracks, and we'll have a mess, and then we'll just shift over to another dish if there's an issue. So I'm just adding a little bit of that sugar. I may not even need all of that. I have a tablespoon, but I'm going to go about half that and then set it aside. I don't know that I necessarily need all of that. And then the ingredients that I have to put inside, totally up to you. I just listed some per preference. And tonight I'm not doing any meat cooking. I'm just using some tofu. So I've got some tofu that I've cut into about 1-inch squares. I've got my vegetable medley here. So I've got carrots, mushrooms, a couple different kinds of mushrooms, shiitake, and like a button mushroom. I've got bok choy, some baby bok choy that I cut up. A little bit of onion. I don't think that was on the recipe, but I had a slice left from another recipe, so I grabbed that. And a leek, which is like a green onion. I don't know if a lot of people work with leeks. There may be some questions about that. But I wanted to introduce it as a new vegetable, and they're really, really flavorful. It's traditionally used in a lot of your classical cuisine, European style cuisine. But I just wanted to show a whole one and then point out that it's super important that you wash them really good. These are grown in like really muddy water. So a lot of the rain and the splash of the irrigation systems will splash sand and mud inside. And if you open this up, you can always tell. I'm not even going to prep it here on the counter just because I don't have a sink and I don't want to get the sand and the mud on the table. But you can probably see all of the sand and mud that's inside here. You can even see it around the base. So if you use a leek, great flavor, excellent for a lot of soups and classic dishes, as I mentioned, but you want to make sure that you cut it and then submerge it in a large pot of water, move them around and wash all of the sand off and then take them out. You'll see that sand on the bottom. So I've done that already here. And the part that we use primarily is the white and the yellow. It's like a big green onion. And we want the nice flavorful white portion of it. And the light green works as well. And then as it starts to turn more of the dark green, we don't use that portion. It can be used in stocks, things like that, like for making the vegetable stock that we had here. I also use the tops tonight, washed and lined the steamer basket that I'll show you here in a minute. But we're just going to take these and cut them a little bit, then all of our vegetables will be prepared. And I don't know if there's any questions, Cindy, feel free.
Okay, first from Carol, can you use that pot, the ceramic pot that you have, on an electric stove?
Yeah, absolutely. This should be fine on an electric stove, should be fine in the oven. Over an open fire, honestly, is how they were used traditionally. So it should hold up great. It feels, and I did pottery all through high school. I did it for years. It feels a little thin. I prefer it to be a little bit thicker, but any of your clay pots should be, if they're high fired, like I was saying, those are temperatures over 1,000 degrees. You should have no trouble with it. Ideally, also having a glaze on the inside that is water resistant, so the clay itself isn't porous and won't absorb it. But that should be no problem at all.
Okay, another question, one from Patricia. She wants to know if you're using canned vegetable broth.
No, we made our vegetable broth in the back, but we do use canned from time to time. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. You can even get nice, the cubes today. And more often than not, when we do stock here, low fat and sodium free, if you don't have the time to make chicken stock or different stocks like that, beef, they do a nice salt-free or low sodium base, whereas most of your bases traditionally always had a high degree of salt in them. So canned, cubes, or fresh works fine. Great question.
We have some questions about leeks.
Yep, go ahead.
Beatrice wants to know why throw away the green part of the leaf. And Lonnie wants to know what else can you do with it? Her husband, and Ingrid said her husband cooks stew with it.
Yeah, you don't have to. If you look here, they get a little tough. I mean, it's like a green onion in a sense. Where I grew up, we'd cut off the white part and we'd eat that and throw away the green. And then I've worked in restaurants where traditionally they just cut off the white part, throw that away, and use only the green. So you can use all of it up until where it starts to get too tough. And you'll be able to tell if you break a piece off, it gets a little more fibrous and a little bit more tough towards the top. So for this one, I would say about here would be fine. And as you cut towards the center, the light green continues to go. Show you here. The light green will continue to go upward here where the outer one is a dark. The center will be light green. So you sort of have to take it apart and utilize whichever portion you want for whatever you're making. But for stews and stuff, you can use probably all but about 1.5 inches or 2 inches. And you know, I mean, if you wanted to eat that, that's great, but it is going to be a little fibrous and a little tough. But I mean, that's fine, I think, for most parts, most dishes anyways.
Another question about the leeks from Lonnie. Are they seasonal?
You can get them here year round. Generally, I went to Times, or actually Chef Steve did today, and they did not have any. So we had to run by Safeway. Alice picked some up at Safeway. So you can find them in most of your supermarkets year round. Yeah.
Okay, some more questions. So all of a sudden we got plenty. Anne wants to know, can you use a wok? Jan wants to know, can we use a Dutch oven?
Yep, absolutely. Any of those would work. And then the recipe I think I sent out had, you can use a stainless steel pot, you can use a rice cooker, you could use a wok, you can use any vessel that you want. What I find is that, I don't know if it's the romance of it or the psychology of it, but I always find the earthenware creates a different flavor when you're cooking. It's like cooking something on a campfire. It always seems to taste a little bit different, not necessarily better, but just maybe it's the mood and everything that's set from it. But you can use any vessel you want. I mean, you could put this in a bowl and use a microwave if you have to. So there's nothing wrong with any of those techniques. Just remember that what we're doing here is simmering the vegetables. So I'm bringing this to a boil and it's starting to boil right now, which is what we want because we want to burn off a little bit of that alcohol that's in there. There's not a lot in sake, but we don't want it to be overpowering. So I'll let that boil for a second, then we'll start to add the vegetables that we have in the order that takes longest to cook. Okay. So if I'm looking at these vegetables here, and I just cut the shiitakes traditional method, you just take your knife and cut a little V across the top, channel it out. And I wouldn't waste that. I'll just put it in with my steamed vegetables. It makes it look a little prettier and I guess makes it look like the chef has more skill, but we don't want to waste that portion. That can also help expedite the cooking process.
We have a couple of questions about the sake. One is, well, both of them say, what can you substitute for sake? And one of them is because they don't drink. So what's your sake substitute?
If you don't drink, I would probably just add a tablespoon of rice vinegar towards the end, and that will give a little bit of the similar flavor. Most of that alcohol is going to be boiled off, and that's what we're doing right now. So it's probably almost gone already. And then by the time we're done cooking, it will be probably thoroughly gone. So when you're cooking with low alcohol beers, wine, spirits, and things like that, it will cook off in the process. So if you were to make a salad dressing or a marinade or something that's not cooked, then the heat isn't present to evaporate the alcohol, then you'll get that alcohol flavor. But if you want to omit it, just a little bit of vinegar in at the end would help, a little splash. And then we have the noodles here. And this is just a yam noodle. And you can pick those up in the store actually in packs. We got these at times. And shirataki or yam noodle. And this is the one that's already cut in noodles. They also sell a block that you cut your own noodles. Usually they're cut larger, more like udon style. Directions are on the back, but they're very simple. They're already cooked. You just, more often than not, they'll be drained and rinsed and soaked for about 30 minutes in hot water, or they'll be blanched really quickly to take the flavor off. Because the packaged flavor that brine that they put them in can be a little bit strong for some folks. But these will go in right at the end and those are ready to go. You could use any noodle you want or omit the noodles too if you wanted to, totally up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding some of these vegetables. Like the carrots will take longest. I'm going to add those. I'm going to add the onions and leeks.
Question about the leeks since you're putting them in.
Yep.
What flavor does the leek add? Can you use green onion instead?
Absolutely can. Yeah, I had Steve pick up, great observation. I had Steve pick up some green onions in case they didn't have the leeks, which is what I would have used instead. But here I also have some onion. So it basically is an onion. It's like a giant green onion in essence. So it's a little bit more hardy, obviously, because they're bigger, more mature, firmer, but it is an onion. So you're going to be getting that flavor from it for sure. And then I'm putting in the baby bok choy. I'll put in the larger mushrooms at this point. Turn it down just a touch and let that simmer and then I'll come back to it because I don't want to put the tofu in until the very end, and the small mushrooms and the leaf of the bok choy would go in right at the end. I also have some herbs, and I did green onions here, some of those ones that Steve picked up, some basil, and then the tops for the tot soy. And I cut them a little bit. I cut the green onions, but you can also use scissors. So when I put them in this cup, I thought, oh, I need to make it a little bit smaller. So here's a little trick. You can just take a pair of scissors, drop them inside your bowl, and simply cut through them like that. So that you can just do that as long as you want, depending on how small you want them to be. And that will be going in right at the very end. Nice
We're
and
getting a
fresh.
lot more questions for you.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. What about mirin? What can we substitute it with?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's not a lot that has that same exact flavor. I mean, it's sweetened sake that may have some alcohol, or the alcohol cooked up. I would just add a little extra sake if that were the case, if you didn't have the mirin. But you can get the nice small kind bottles there. It adds a little sweetness. It adds that sort of rice flavor. Yeah, and like I said earlier, the rice wine vinegar would work as well. But that sugar element would be missing. But if you're looking to omit that, then that would be fine. Good question. And you can keep firing away. I will.
Okay, I will. So 2 questions about the broth. One wants to know, can she use better, or the person, can they use better than bouillon? And the other one is, can she use bone broth?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Bone broth is great, better than bouillon. Any broth, canned, cubed, or product that you can find like that, any stock will work great.
Somebody wants to know about the noodles. Is a noodle konjaku?
What about, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Is the noodle konjaku?
I don't know.
Konnyaku.
This one is the shirataki noodle. Konnyaku, maybe that's the larger one, but they're all yam-based noodles. So there's different shapes and sizes, but this is the particular one that we're using here, called the shirataki one. We'll have to look that one up. Let's see. Great question.
Now,
so many products out there, it's hard to master them all.
Somebody is asking, can you use stevia instead of sugar?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we've tried to do over the course of this class is steer away from the high salt, sucrose, and things like that, using substitutes. Because this quantity was so small, I went ahead and used a little bit, but yeah, monk sugar, stevia, anything like that to add that little bit of sweetness. A little bit of honey would work. Totally up to you. You could even come up with some fruit. If you were to think of this flavor profile, a little bit earthy, is there a fruit that you might be able to add to this that would give it some natural fructose and sweetness? You know what might be nice in there? A little slice of pineapple or a little bit of pineapple juice. So we encourage you to try to utilize the things that you might have at home and the things that might be left over from other dishes, and that would be great to utilize. So just, yeah, get creative and think, how do I add sweetness to this dish without adding sugar or sucrose? Great.
There's a question about how do I prepare enoki mushroom?
You just cut the ends off. They're really ready to go. They come in packs about that size. And it's almost actually completely edible, but traditionally there's a point where the individual mushrooms come together in a cluster. And more often than not, that cluster bulb is cut off. And you're just kind of breaking up the individual or small bunches of mushrooms. But you can use all the way down to the base, just trim that part where it was connected to the ground off. And that part can be chopped up and utilized in other dishes or sauteed or however you want to cook them. Would work great.
So we
Great.
have a couple questions regarding if you don't want to use tofu or if you want to add. Once somebody wants to add fish or meat, do we pre-cook and add later?
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a great question. I almost brought out, we had some pre-cooked chicken. I was going to bring that out and utilize that, but I decided to just keep it vegetarian. So you can do it either way. If you have the meat cooked in advance, it would go in at the end. If the meat is raw, you would put it in earlier. Like the tofu's basically raw. I'm going to throw it in after everything's done, and it's pretty close. It really just needs to be warmed up, as do the small mushrooms and the tops for the bok choy. The herbs also as a garnish at the end. So that's simple. If you're doing meats, it just depends on the thickness and what type of meat it is. You just don't want to be serving anything that's raw, obviously. So just make sure that if you're using raw, that it's going in on the front end. Anything that would have gone in early on this particular dish when we started it would be done already. I mean, don't drop a large 8-ounce steak in there, although actually that might be kind of nice, because then you could do it to a medium rare, take it out and slice it. That might work, but just make sure that if you're cooking items that need to be thoroughly cooked, primarily poultry, that it cooks all the way through. And then for the roasted veg, just real quick, Cindy, and then I'll take more questions. I just have some onion here, a couple rings. I diced up a little bit of the sweet red peppers. I took some of the kabocha. We had a lot of this in stock over the last month or so because it's in season. I trimmed most of the skin off, but I wanted to keep some of it. Very similar to the dish that we made with this broth, but it had dashi, I think, a number of weeks ago. And I'm going to leave this whole. This is going to be the one that we're going to roast. So it's got the vegetables in there, and that can be anything you want. It doesn't have to be just onions or peppers. It could be, you know, butternut squash and green onions or a sweet potato, anything like that for roasting would work great. And I just separating that out, a little bit of avocado oil. You could also just use your spray if you are, you know, we tend to use avocado spray. We have olive oil spray. This is like a butter pan spray that gives kind of a nice buttery flavor that I'll hit these vegetables with at the end. But whatever you want to use to just give it a little bit of fat on the outside, and that allows the herbs to then stick, or the seasoning that you're using. So I'm just going to toss this a little bit. And then I have this spice blend that Steve made, which has about 40 different spices and herbs in it. We don't even know what's in it. We've used it and given it away to some folks that are asking what's in it, and we don't know. So it's really good, but I should have written it down when we made it. That's just lightly coated. It's got a little bit of salt in there as well. And for this one, I'm just going to place it flat. We do this a lot at home or around the holidays. And I'll put the vegetables on top. You can put them around as well. And then what I like to do is just add, because it's going to be roasting, it's a dry heat method, a touch of water. So just so that we have a little bit of moisture there. I'm picking up all that extra seasoning. Rather than just dump the water or the stock on top, I put it in the bowl, I shake it up, loosen all the oil and the herbs and spices, and then I'm going to just split it between these two. And it'll sort of sit in the well of that kabocha. And then when we put it in the oven, that'll help create a little bit of moisture in what would otherwise be a completely dry heat.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, I have two noodle questions. Well, one is Anonymous said, I believe yam noodles is konjaku.
Okay.
And then the other one from Pat, she said, I bought bean thread noodles, siphon, and don't know how to use them. If I soak them, do they work?
They should. Are they the dry kind? If they're dry, then you're going to always want to soak them. Usually you'll always find the instructions on the side of the noodle or the packet, right? So And like we were saying, I mean, every manufacturer has a different maybe hydration ratio in their particular product. So you may need to blanch it, or you may need to boil it, or you may need to soak it. Just depends. I would just always make sure you default to the guidelines that are on the package. Like this one, it says to soak for 30 minutes in hot water or blanch. And yeah, that other noodle, this is a yam noodle as well. It must be just the size of the cut, sort of like a pasta. You know, if you look at penne, and then there's mini penne, and then there's spaghetti and rigatine. There's all these different names for what is essentially still pasta. So probably even more products that are made with that, I would guess.
I have some more pot questions.
Yep.
Again, two people are asking, can a crock pot be used? And Anonymous wants to know about the Donabe pot. Can it go on an induction cooktop?
Let me address that one first, because the answer sadly is no. Induction conducts the heat between particular types of metal. So cast iron doesn't work, aluminum doesn't work. It's generally stainless steel that's preferred for that. So I would say no on that first part. And then for a crock pot, you probably could. The challenge with a crock pot is that they're super slow, or most ideal, I think, for slow cooking. Some of them have a broad range. If you look at an Instapot, which is basically a crock pot, and items like that, that have a simmer function or a saute function, where you can have the lid off and boil. Because what we wanted to do initially is to boil this and get that alcohol off. It's basically done now. And now we can put in our other vegetables. A crock pot would be a little bit harder to manage because it just moves so slow. So if you have a crock pot that allows you to, or something similar, to bring it up to a boil, then that would work. A rice cooker, honestly, would work for that, because it will boil and maintain that temperature without shutting itself off. So you just have to use it like it's a little cook pot.
Question about the roasting.
Yeah.
Two people ask, what time, or what temperature are you baking the squash, and for how long?
Yeah, great question. It's a secret. No, I'm just kidding. This one I have it, I would bake it at 350. And I did the one earlier for about 18 minutes, and it came out perfect. And those were quarters of a squash about this size. So this is about the size of, a little bit smaller than like a volleyball. So quartered would work. So it depends on the size that you're cutting it. The smaller the cut, the quicker it will cook. But I kind of like serving this style, one piece per serving. So cut the pieces in the size that you plan to serve, because then you can put certain things, the vegetables and stuff can go in the middle in that well when you serve it, and it's almost like a meal in one. We've often packed it with sausage and things like that, which turns out great as well. I think we even did it for the class that we did here, but we had wrapped it in a tea leaf and experimented with that. So yeah, absolutely, you can. And then I'm just going to add the tofu. Okay. And other questions too?
Yes. Tori is asking, in what order are the vegetables being steamed?
Yeah, I'm going to go to that right now. That's a great question. Ooh, hot. Here's my towel. I have tough fingers, but not that tough. So anytime you're doing steamed vegetables, or similar to what we did here, the items that take the longest always go first. So hopefully you can see with the steam coming off. In the bottom, I had my carrots. I had the stems of the tatsoi, some shiitake mushrooms, the thicker, larger shiitake mushrooms, some celery. And then what I did on the bottom, I'm going to try to show you here, is I lined it with the green portion of the leek that we talked about earlier. I was going to use tea leaves, but because I had the the leeks, and I wasn't going to use them in this dish. I thought, hey, let's line that and anything that can impart a little bit of flavor. So again, that earthy flavor from this is going to blend with these fresh, crisp vegetables and give it that little extra flavor. And if you'll notice here, what I did in the water, just that was boiling up to steam it, I won't steam up the camera, I put in a little bit of rosemary. So, you know, that little bit of herb in the bottom in the water will create some flavor in the steam itself. So as it's coming up and impart a little bit of flavor in the vegetables that you're serving. And then once, that's why I use two separate ones here. So I have the vegetables that take a little bit longer, the firmer vegetables on the bottom. And then on the top, after those cook for about 5 minutes, I just drop the second basket on that just really needs to be warmed up. A little bit of kabocha, the broccoli, the smaller mushrooms, some snap peas, and the tofu. And then this is where I was talking about, you know, I'm going to serve them right in this vessel here. A little spritz of olive oil, or I really kind of like this buttery spray, especially for vegetables like this. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of that. That would be ready to serve with just a little bit of seasoning on top. So I could use this nice blend that we have. I could borrow a little bit of the herbs that we have here, but I have our Hawaiian seasoning blend. It's not too strong. It's got a little bit of seaweed in it and the mamaki and stuff. I'm going to just hit that with just a little bit. And then I think what's really important, and we talk about it all the time, is a little bit of acidity. So there's nothing that's really acidic in here. So if I were to cut just a small wedge of lemon or lime, and just before I serve it, I hit it with a little bit of that. That'll just wake up your tongue and adds that freshness. The zest would be great as well. If you wanted to do that, you could take a zester. And it doesn't take much, just like 2 strokes. And if you did that prior to service, you're going to have the most fragrant. You'll just pick up through the steam, the rosemary, the lemon, all the flavors of the vegetables. Turns out great. And this looks like it's ready. I'm going to just take this lid off. Test the broth. I always like to make sure that the flavor is where I need it to be before I serve it, because you can still make an adjustment. That's good. If it were too salty, you could add a little bit of stock or even a little bit of water. That would be fine. If it weren't flavorful enough, you could come back and hit it with a little bit of soy or whatever flavoring agents you were using in the dish. And then just before you serve it, you're going to want to put your fresh herbs. Watercress would be great. I should have picked some of that up today. I wrote it in the recipe as an option, but I didn't pick it up today. And then this, I'm just
Okay, couple questions about recipes.
yeah, go right ahead.
Recipe for the roasted vegetables and for the steamed vegetables.
Yep.
Because I don't think it came with our one pot dish.
It did not. No, that was an added.
Okay. And then Patricia was asking, are you saying you can either steam the veggies or drop them in the donabe, or did you prepare 2 sets of veggies?
We have 3 dishes really. I'm trying to overachieve because I'm getting older, so I want to make sure that I deliver something that's worth your time. So this is a standalone separate dish, the one recipe. But as I was looking at that, I always worry about like running out of or finishing too early and it's 20 after and then we don't have anything to talk about and you'll sign off early. I want to make you stay for the whole class. So I added the extra. So this was just a second technique to utilize the steaming technique. And then what we can do now is look at the roasting. I can pull out the one that I had from earlier. The one that I just put in is not quite done yet. I'm going to just use this lid as a serving vessel. And you can see It's a little bit warm, but you can see that at 350 for about 18 minutes, kind of caramelized all the vegetables. That steam dissipated that we had from the little bit of moisture that we poured in the well. It didn't burn on the bottom or anything like that. So it's nice and fresh. And then that's basically one portion per person. That's what I was talking about earlier. This would be almost like an entree style meal. This could be served with, you know, a small piece of fish or something, and you'd have a meal in and of itself. So that would be the third dish. So in terms of recipes, I probably owe Jackie recipes. I'm always like doing something that doesn't have a recipe. I write a lot of recipes, but I then make extra things and we don't have recipes for them. So if you want a recipe for that, just put it in the chat and I can send something to Jackie. But just to review really quickly here for this one, it was just the squash of choice, seasoning of choice, and then your vegetable of choice, tossed with a little bit of oil, roasted at 350, depending on the size, you know, 15 to 18 minutes, maybe 20 if it's a little bit bigger. This is just fresh vegetables, the spritz of oil at the end if you wish, and seasoning of choice with herbs and lemon. And then this as the noodles, the tofu, and that's the one that has the recipe that we sent out. So like multiple different dishes for you to experiment with. But we wanted to highlight vegetables again, try to bring up the rear with end of the season for some of the summer squashes. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you have other questions, Cindy, feel free to let me know.
Okay, Lindy wants to know, what about the noodles?
Oh, I don't know if you caught me throwing them in there. Did you see that? Sorry. I was answering a question while I put them in. They're right here. So you can, I noticed this particular brand seems to be a little bit long for me. I don't know about you. Some people love the really long noodles, but I mean, I'm holding that from the center and some of these noodles are like 4 feet long. I always end up wearing whatever the sauce is when I eat long noodles. So had I used this brand before, I probably would have cut them a little bit. And then I just put them in just to warm them at the end. And spread them around the outer side of the pot. So this would be ready to serve. I didn't want to mix up the tofu in there. Actually, they were out of firm tofu, so we have soft. And if I were to stir that up, it would break and fall apart. But I also like the contrast in color. I want to keep the fresh herbs on top. I want to keep the white of the tofu visible so that when you put the pot on the table for people to serve themselves, then you have a nice presentation.
Lori wants to know, what was the seasoning on pumpkins specifically?
On the kabocha? Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we make a lot of seasonings that we don't know what they are. Not the ones that we give away. We have those recipes. But that particular one, I put it here somewhere, is a blend. And it's, I mean, we have honestly like 40 different spices in there. Anything from black pepper to cardamom to allspice. We had a donation from Mahana, who's someone who used to work here, of a large vessel with a bunch of different bags of imported spices. And most of them were whole, so we just ground them all up, has some fennel in it, and we just made our mix. We added a little bit of salt, a pinch of sugar, and we ended up making about a gallon jug full of this random spice blend. So I can't tell you exactly what's in it because I honestly don't know. But any spice blend would work for this particular dish. Even your straight garlic salt, even salt and pepper would work. Sort of up to you what it is that you like. You can utilize that. But I, again, kind of like the earthy ones to go with this particular dish.
So a question from Anonymous. What herbs did you add in the donabe?
Yeah, the last part. Here's that blend I'll show you.
The herbs that you put in the donabe?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, there's the herb or the spice blend that we have. It's even got some fennel seed and all kinds of stuff in it. The herbs that went in there, the ones that I cut up with the scissors, we had fresh basil, green onions, and I took the top to the tatsoi, or excuse me, to the choy sum that we used in the steamed vegetables. So any herb would work in there for that, whatever you prefer. If it's lighter, it's the cilantro style or parsley, things that would wilt more quickly. You want to put that right at the end just before service. Basil's a little hardier. The green onions will hold up really well, but that's totally up to you. But I use the basil, green onion, and the tatsoi or the choy sum tops.
Okay, question about the steaming.
Yeah.
Was it just water with the rosemary or is it a broth?
Yep. No, that was just water. It looks like a broth now. That's basically rosemary water. Might be a little strong to be utilizing in something, but rosemary grows really well here. So our bush, it's one of the ones that does the best in our yard. So we try to find creative uses for it all of the time. But that's nothing but water with a sprig of rosemary in it. Good question.
So Sandra was confirming that your tofu should be firm.
I almost, well, you can get away with any style of tofu. The only thing you have to be aware of is the fragility of it. So the softer it is, obviously, the more likely it is to break and fall apart. Would it be a horrible thing if these pieces weren't in perfect squares? No, probably not. But in general, we tend to utilize for dishes that are getting moved around a little bit, a firm tofu. Now, this could also have been done where we put the soft silken tofu in the dish that we're serving it in individually, and then the rest of the items were spooned over the top of it. That would be enough to warm it and keep it from falling apart and allow your guest or yourself to break it with a fork or your chopsticks as you eat it. So it doesn't really matter per se. You just have to be a lot more careful if you're using ones that are softer. And it's up to you what texture you're looking for. Some people prefer the texture of the really soft tofu. Others prefer the firmer style. Maybe some prefer the medium, but you can use any one. It's just up to you.
Oh, one last question from Tammy. Can you overcook tofu?
Oh, absolutely. Especially the soft tofu. You really don't cook tofu. It's really more of a heating of it. It's already done. A lot of people don't enjoy tofu because they don't think it has much of a taste. Most of the taste is the taste that we impart to the tofu with the cooking method or the sauce. But it's sort of a matter of taste. It's just up to you. If you handle it too much, like I said, it will tend to fall apart. The other element to liking or disliking tofu, I think, is the texture. If you have fried tofu, it gets a crust on the outside, especially if it's fried firm tofu. It's almost like a sponge, so it can be used in stir fries and things like that. So it would be fried in advance and then put into the stir fry. Even silken tofu can be fried. Sometimes you'll get the small squares in Japanese restaurants where it's lightly potato starch or cornstarch, different techniques. And then it's fried and served with ginger and soy sauce on the side that gets poured over the top. My wife loves that particular dish. Green onions, usually all over the top. So yeah, in any of those techniques, you're almost not really cooking it. You're just adding either texture or flavor to the tofu. That's a really good question.
Mahalo, Chef Dan. You filled up your time nicely.
My clock,
And,
says it's like 7:45. So I didn't notice that till we started. I thought we had more time, but the battery died. So I have no idea what time it is. I'm just talking until you tell me.
Okay, mahalo nui loa.
Mahalo, Cindy.
Thank you for
Thanks,
watching,
everyone.
everybody from home. Hope we join us next week, December 9th, for our holiday pies. And again, let's wish Chef Dan a happy birthday.
Mahalo, everyone. See you for pies next week. Should be fun.
Happy birthday, Dan. Have a good evening.